Right now, somewhere in Azeroth, a guild is forming up beneath Silvermoon's shattered sky. The void is closing in. Xal'atath is waiting. And 20 years after a world built on a $22,000 investment first opened its gates, millions still call this place home. World of Warcraft has survived server meltdowns, a peak of 12 million subscribers, corporate crisis, and a $68.7 billion acquisition by Microsoft. Midnight is the story being written today. The last Titan is the promise of tomorrow. But to understand where Azeroth is going, you need to understand how 3 UCLA graduates, a borrowed $11,000, and a game about orcs and humans started something no one, not even Blizzard, could fully control. On February 8, 1991, Michael Morhaime, Alan Adam, and Frank Pierce officially incorporated Silicon and Synapse in Irvine, California. Working out of a small office, they bootstrapped the studio with a $22,000 investment, combining Adam's college savings with $11,000 Morhaime borrowed interest-free from his grandmother. Their early business relied on porting games like Battle Chess 2 for other publishers. In late 1993, they briefly became Chaos Studios, but trademark issues and a 1994 acquisition by Davidson and Associates led to a permanent name, Blizzard Entertainment. That same year, Blizzard launched Warcraft, Orcs and Humans, a real-time strategy game where players gathered resources, built bases, and directed battles from a top-down view. This release established the primary conflict between the Alliance and the Horde, setting a massive fantasy war in motion. The studio quickly expanded its catalog. Warcraft 2 widened the scale of the world, while Diablo introduced dark atmospheres, random loot, and online persistence through Battle.net. StarCraft followed in 1998, perfecting competitive multiplayer. By the time Warcraft 3, Reign of Chaos, and its expansion, The Frozen Throne, arrived, the strategy gameplay shifted to focus on individual hero characters. Writer Chris Metzen and producer Bill Roper crafted detailed personal histories for these heroes, while artist Samwise Didier designed a bright, oversized visual style. These separate narrative, artistic, and technical threads were quietly assembling the foundations of a single, coherent fantasy world, Azeroth. In late 1999, Blizzard shut down a struggling post-apocalyptic project called Nomad and redirected the team to build a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, or MMORPG. This emerging genre was defined by persistent virtual worlds, environments that continue to exist, run, and progress even when players are logged off. Blizzard wanted to simplify these notoriously punishing online games to reach a broader audience. Players would no longer command entire armies from a detached top-down perspective. Instead, they would inhabit a single, individual character, exploring a continuous three-dimensional universe. The early design group focused on approachable controls, recognizable Alliance and Horde factions, and a quest-driven progression system that accommodated both casual players and dedicated groups. As development progressed toward a planned November 2004 release, production risk shifted from creative design to engineering survival. Early alpha and closed beta tests exposed severe infrastructure weaknesses. The custom code suffered from constant memory leaks, high network latency, and immense authentication strain. To distribute the weight, engineers developed clustered server scaling, dividing the environment into separate servers. In mid-2004, Blizzard launched a 3-month stress test, a trial designed to deliberately overload the network with players to find breaking points. This test proved that sheer player demand, rather than software bugs, would be the greatest technical threat to their virtual world. On November 23, 2004, World of Warcraft launched in North America, followed by its European release in February of 2005. Blizzard's engineers had prepared infrastructure to handle an estimated 200,000 concurrent players, but the sheer volume of simultaneous connections immediately shattered those expectations. Within hours of the server's opening, retail stores sold out of physical copies, and the login portals buckled. Players faced queues exceeding 90 minutes, constant disconnections, and persistent realm-full errors. Overloaded hardware groaned under the strain, forcing engineers into emergency server expansions as they raced to deploy new physical realms. The launch day forums from late 2004 document a service in total crisis, far removed from the smooth, polished nostalgia of later years. Technically, the launch was a failure, but as a social experiment, it succeeded almost immediately. While waiting for servers to stabilize, displaced players gathered on early web forums, IRC channels, and primitive voice networks. A massive community explosion was taking shape around the shared struggle of trying to get in. When players finally stepped into Azeroth, they found themselves locked into isolated realms that functioned like local towns. Because there were no cross-server features, you saw the same people every day. Reputations were built, bitter faction rivalries emerged, and each server began developing its own distinct culture, legends, and bad actors. The rapid account growth was unprecedented. Within a week, 500,000 players had registered. Within 3 months, that number reached 1.5 million, ballooning to 5 million by July of 2005. Mainstream media outlets struggled to explain how a computer game had suddenly transformed into the world's most populated virtual meeting ground. Leveling from level 1 to 60 was a slow, months-long trek that forced players to cooperate. Along the roads, they banded together in guilds, persistent, player-run communities that served as the foundation for progression and identity. To fund their adventures, they traded in the auction house, a massive player-run marketplace where materials, armor, and weapons were bought and sold using in-game gold. This virtual economy became so lucrative that it birthed a real-world gold farming industry, where players, particularly in East Asia, harvested currency to sell for real money. Outside of safety zones, players engaged in spontaneous open-world player versus player battles, clashing over resource nodes and territory. Within faction territories, public chat channels like Baron's Chat served as informal public squares, filled with endless pop culture debates and inside jokes. Others used the game's assets to produce machinima, creating user-made comedic films that populated early video sharing platforms. The ultimate test of coordination lay in raids, massive 40-player battles against powerful bosses. Success required strict organization around class roles. Heavily armored tanks absorbed blows, healers restored health, and damage dealers wore down the enemy. In 2005, progression began in the volcanic depths of Molten Core and the dragon-filled halls of Blackwing Lair. Surviving these zones required weeks of preparation, including harvesting fire resistance gear and stockpiling consumable potions. By 2006, the scale escalated with the server-wide war effort to open the gates of Ahn'Qiraj, culminating in the grueling challenges of the Floating Necropolis, Naxxramas. Guild leaders managed spreadsheet rosters and strict attendance policies just to keep 40 people functioning as a unit. This intense environment generated viral cultural milestones. In May 2005, a recording of a failed raid poll gave birth to Leroy Jenkins, a comedic battle cry that spread across the internet. 4 months later, an unintended virtual plague called Corrupted Blood escaped a raid instance. This highly contagious disease swept through crowded capital cities, decimating thousands of low-level characters. The panic, quarantines, and behavioral patterns of the players were so authentic that epidemiologists and researchers later analyzed the incident in peer-reviewed journals to study real-world disease transmission. Through these emergent behaviors, virtual economies, and self-organized communities, players actively shaped the world's history, transforming digital systems into a living, breathing society. In January 2007, Blizzard shattered the boundaries of this established social world by opening the Dark Portal. This towering, green-glowing gateway propelled players into Outland, a shattered, floating red wasteland devastated by past wars. The expansion, the Burning Crusade, redefined the virtual environment, introducing 2 new playable races that permanently altered faction appeal: the magic-addicted Blood Elves for the Horde, and the crystalline, spacefaring Draenei for the Alliance. Crossing this threshold offered players unprecedented freedom, but also introduced a fundamental shift in how they moved through space. Blizzard introduced flying mounts, purchasable airborne beasts that allowed players to rise above the terrain, completely altering their perception of geography and exposing the vertical scale of the jagged zones. For competitive combat, the game provided structured arenas. Here, small teams fought in bracketed matches to build their arena rating, a numeric skill score that granted prestigious titles and high-tier weapons. This gameplay shift created a highly visible social hierarchy. In capital cities, a character's armor, titles, and rare mounts served as instant status symbols. Rating split into distinct tiers of prestige. The 10-player Haunted Tower of Karajan became a cozy, highly social hub for casual guilds, while the daunting 25-player Black Temple was reserved for elite teams seeking to slay the iconic demon hunter, Illidan Stormrage. This era forged lifelong guild friendships and intense PvP rivalries, fueling immense player coordination. Throughout 2007, these additions drove massive subscriber growth, cementing the expansion as a monumental success. In November 2008, Blizzard turned its focus to the frozen north. The expansion Wrath of the Lich King brought players to Northrend, a continent defined by isolation and the looming presence of Arthas Menethil. Arthas served as the direct bridge to the studio's real-time strategy history, transforming a familiar villain into the focal point of a massive, long-form narrative. Players confronted this threat using the game's first hero class, the Death Knight. This new class allowed players to inhabit a former enemy made playable, starting at level 55 with dark, plague-based powers. The expansion's early chapters escalated inside Ulduar, a sprawling facility that combined environmental mystery with ambitious raid storytelling. The narrative reached its peak within the frozen spires of Icecrown Citadel, where years of character development culminated in the final battle against the Lich King. In late 2009, Blizzard introduced the Dungeon Finder, an automated system that paired players across different servers and teleported them directly into dungeons. This tool eliminated the need to recruit groups manually in chat channels. While it offered immense convenience, it quietly eroded server identity. Players no longer had to maintain local reputations to find groups, trading local community ties for fast access. This design shift occurred as World of Warcraft reached its absolute cultural summit, peaking at approximately 12 million active subscribers. The world had grown larger than anyone could have predicted, forcing developers to balance the demands of a massive mainstream audience with the social structures that made the virtual world feel like home. In December of 2010, Blizzard shattered the geography of Azeroth itself. The cataclysmic return of the corrupted dragon aspect Deathwing literally tore the virtual world apart, serving as the first large-scale experiment in whether a live game could rewrite its own history. Instead of adding an isolated new continent, developers chose to completely rebuild Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms from the ground up, permanently erasing the original versions of the zones that players had spent 6 years inhabiting. This redesign introduced phasing, a software system that dynamically altered the environment based on individual player quest progress. As players completed missions, villages burned, coastlines flooded, and key characters relocated, forcing the virtual world to actively respond to their actions. While these updates modernized ancient quest lines and made the environment feel more active, they also triggered a deep wave of communal grief. The pristine, untouched world of 2004 was gone, replaced by scarred terrains and restructured storylines. The expansion culminated in the Dragon Soul raid, a final confrontation where players fought Deathwing atop his back and amidst the clouds. While critics praised the technical improvements and streamlined leveling experience, the permanent destruction of the original world fractured the community's shared nostalgia. For many, it felt like an erasure of their early memories. By showing a willingness to alter its physical foundation, Blizzard proved that Azeroth was not a static monument, but a malleable space where even the ground beneath the player's feet could be permanently overwritten. In September 2012, Blizzard shifted its gaze from apocalyptic destruction to a hidden, mist-shrouded continent. Mists of Pandaria expanded the boundaries of Azeroth, moving past traditional Western fantasy toward Eastern-inspired aesthetics and themes. Players discovered the lush Jade Forest and the soaring peaks of Kunlai Summit, stepping into the shoes of the new Monk class. This expansion introduced cooperative scenarios for quick 3-player adventures, alongside a brand new turn-based minigame, Pet Battles. This separate system created an entirely new collection and progression economy, turning companions into combatants. At its core, the expansion challenged the very identity of Warcraft. The initial reveal of anthropomorphic pandas drew skepticism from players who feared the game was softening its dark, war-torn edge. Yet this new territory did not abandon the central faction struggle. Instead, the arrival of the Alliance and the Horde stirred up a negative energy known as the Shah, feeding on the negative emotions of the conflict. The war became literal poison to this pristine land. While players debated the cultural representation and lighter tone, critics praised the bold art direction and the narrative complexity of the war campaign. Raid environments like the Heart of Fear showcased the insectoid mantid threat, anchoring the endgame progression. By introducing a broader visual and thematic vocabulary, Blizzard demonstrated that thematic change could coexist with the core faction conflict, proving that a lighter, curious exterior could harbor some of the franchise's most mature storytelling. In November of 2014, Blizzard redirected players to an alternate timeline, launching Warlords of Draenor. This expansion promised a return to the franchise's raw, heavy metal roots, sending forces through a temporal portal to explore the savage world of Draenor before its historical destruction. The center of this new experience was the Garrison, a personal base designed to offer customized progression and resource management. For the first time, players built their own fortresses, recruited followers, and directed operations from a private hub. While this system gave players immediate agency, it triggered an unexpected consequence: player isolation. Instead of gathering in public capital cities, players remained inside their personal garrisons, managing menus, resource nodes, and automated missions. The social environment of the MMO fractured as players withdrew into these single-player bases, reducing a vibrant multiplayer world into a series of lonely, parallel instances. Despite these systemic issues, the expansion opened with immense anticipation. The initial endgame, anchored by the High Maul raid, featured superb boss encounters, and the pristine, hostile zones displayed outstanding visual design. But the momentum quickly stalled, triggering severe retention problems. Major planned features were scrapped mid-cycle. Early design documents had scheduled a fully realized Shattrath City raid, but it was cut. As updates slowed to a crawl, the actual breadth of the expansion fell far short of its massive ambitions. Warlords of Draenor ultimately became a defining example of abandoned potential in community memory, showing that a beautiful world could not survive without a steady stream of content to support it. In August of 2016, Blizzard confronted the lingering isolation of Draenor by launching Legion, an expansion that shifted the narrative focus back to the core of player identity, their chosen class. The story resurrected the game's ultimate antagonist, the demonic Burning Legion, threatening Azeroth with total destruction. To meet this threat, developers dismantled the private garrisons and replaced them with shared class halls, sacred sanctuaries where players of the same profession, like paladins or druids, gathered together, regardless of their faction. At the heart of this redemption was the artifact weapon system. Instead of hoping for random weapon drops, every player embarked on a quest to claim a legendary weapon of mythic power, such as the Ashbringer or Doomhammer. For non-players, this meant their character's weapon became a permanent companion that grew stronger alongside them. By completing quests, defeating dungeon bosses, and raiding, players earned artifact power, a specialized currency fed directly into their weapon to unlock specialized talent trees and active abilities. This system restored a profound sense of personal importance, culminating in highly praised endgame raids like the Nighthold. For a community starved of content, the sheer variety of world quests and class-specific storylines sparked a massive revival and enthusiasm. Yet, the very system that restored player confidence carried a heavy toll. Maximizing an artifact weapon required an endless daily grind for artifact power, transforming a system of legendary empowerment into a grueling chore. Still, Legion proved that when players felt personally indispensable to the fate of Azeroth, they were willing to put in the effort, revitalizing the MMO when it needed it most. In August 2018, Blizzard sought to pivot from saving the cosmos to a familiar, localized conflict, launching Battle for Azeroth. This expansion reignited the ancient war between the Alliance and the Horde, dividing the player base across two newly discovered continents, the maritime kingdom of Kul Tiras and the ancient empire of Zandalar. These regions offered rich storytelling, featuring distinct campaigns that detailed the internal politics and struggles of both factions. To bolster their ranks, players recruited allied races, specialized factions that required earned reputation to access as playable characters. Large-scale warfronts simulated classic real-time strategy battles, attempting to capture the feeling of a world-spanning war. While the narrative setting in early raids like Older offered an atmospheric anchor, the underlying gameplay systems quickly tested player patience. Blizzard replaced the beloved artifact weapons of Legion with the Heart of Azeroth, a centralized necklace that players powered using a resource called Azerite. Unlike the legendary weapons of the past, This new system lacked personal identity. Instead of earning exciting new abilities, players found themselves constantly activating passive traits on generic armor pieces, often regaining powers they had already earned on previous gear. This centralized progression made rewards feel arbitrary and unpredictable, eroding the sense of character growth. Combined with an emerging content drought and tedious daily requirements, the fragile bond between progression design and player trust began to splinter. For many, the return to faction identity was not enough to mask a growing exhaustion with systemic grinds. In November of 2020, Blizzard attempted its most metaphysically ambitious expansion yet, pulling players past the Veil of Mortality and into the Shadowlands. To make room for this cosmic transition, developers implemented a drastic level squish, compressing characters from level 120 back down to 60. Players stepped into the afterlife, discovering a sprawling cosmos divided into 4 distinct territories: the angelic spires of Bastion, the war-torn wastes of Maldraxxus, the twilight forests of Ardenweald, and the gothic towers of Revendreth. The art direction was widely praised, capturing a hauntingly beautiful alien environment. Yet, the systems supporting this grand vision quickly polarized the community. Players had to align with one of 4 covenants, governing factions that granted powerful abilities and specialized gear. While Blizzard intended this to be a permanent, meaningful choice, the competitive nature of the game turned it into a burden. Choosing a covenant for its story often meant sacrificing the optimal spells needed for high-level combat. Progression became further entangled in Torghast, Tower of the Damned, a procedurally generated, roguelike dungeon. Players had to repeatedly clear its changing halls to harvest soul ash, a mandatory material needed to craft powerful gear. By the time players reached the Sepulchre of the First Ones, the cosmic, lore-heavy raid that concluded the narrative, the endless cycles of daily chores and locked-in systems had exhausted the community. Shadowlands pushed the boundaries of Warcraft's mythology, but its rigid mechanics and repetitive tasks left player confidence heavily fractured. In November 2022, Blizzard shifted direction away from cosmic threats and complex systems, releasing Dragonflight. This expansion brought players back down to Azeroth to explore the legendary Dragon Isles, a continent defined by ancient cultures and wild, open environments. The developers focused on reducing the bloated progression mechanics that had fatigued players for years, prioritizing exploration over daily chores. To replace the locked-in systems of the past, the design team overhauled the core gameplay experience. They introduced a completely rebuilt, branching talent tree system that returned choice and customization to character progression. Movement also received a massive update through dragon riding, a physics-based, high-speed aerial system that replaced static flying mounts with momentum, dives, and custom drakes. This new mobility turned movement into an active game mechanic, transforming how players traveled across the massive vertical zones. At the endgame, players tested their abilities in the Vault of the Incarnates, a primal raid that anchored the expansion's initial competitive season. The community widely praised the fluid movement and the focus on player freedom. However, the release was not without friction. Some players disliked the initial pacing of the storyline, while others felt frustrated by the temporary restriction of traditional static flying in the new zones. Despite these debates, the expansion stood as a deliberate effort to make the game feel accessible and exploratory once again, steering the online world toward a welcoming path. In August 2024, Blizzard launched The War Within, starting the 3-part Worldsoul saga. This roadmap shifts the narrative focus back to the core of the planet, positioning the Worldsoul of Azeroth itself as the central mystery. To support this multi-year arc, developers introduced systems designed to accommodate players tired of repetitive daily grinds. Among these updates were delves, small-scale, highly adaptable mini-dungeons designed for solo players or small groups to earn high-tier gear without entering formal raids. Flight received a permanent upgrade through Skyriding, which applied physics-based aerial movement to hundreds of legacy mounts. To streamline the daily experience, Blizzard introduced warbands, an account-wide progression system sharing reputations, banks, and achievements across all characters, alongside the stone-skinned Earthen allied race. At the competitive peak, players descended into Nerebar Palace, a subterranean raid serving as the initial endgame anchor, though long-term progression metrics remained subject to verification. Early reception to The War Within was divided. While many praised the focus on solo-friendly activities and account-wide convenience, others expressed concern over expansion fatigue and a design philosophy prioritizing structural breadth over narrative depth. It represents an ongoing effort to serve many different playstyles at once, leaving the long-term impact of this modern roadmap still unfolding. In late 2015, Blizzard stopped disclosing official subscriber numbers, ending a decade of transparent player metrics. From that point on, the public relied on third-party estimates and quarterly earnings reports to gauge the population of Azeroth, which analysts estimated had settled between 3 and 5 million active players. This shift in corporate transparency preceded a deep institutional fracture. In July 2021, the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing filed a lawsuit alleging systemic gender discrimination, sexual harassment, and retaliation at Activision Blizzard. The Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission pursued parallel actions, resulting in an $18 million settlement in March 2022. Activision Blizzard later settled the California state civil rights lawsuit for $54 million in late 2023, following a $35 million SEC settlement regarding reporting deficiencies. The legal crisis accelerated a collapse in leadership continuity. Mike Morhaime had departed the CEO role in 2018, leaving J. Allen Brack to navigate the initial storm before his own resignation in August 2021. Jen O'Neill and Mike Ibarra stepped in as co-leaders, but O'Neill exited within months. Ibarra remained as sole president, only to leave after the company's final transition. Along with these executive departures, the loss of veteran developers stripped the studio of its creative legacy. On October 13, 2023, Microsoft finalized its $68.7 billion acquisition of Activision Blizzard. Yet, the purchase of a parent company does not automatically solve systemic cultural or design challenges. As the studio integrated into Microsoft's gaming division, players were left to grapple with a complex reality. The community was no longer just asking for better expansions. They were questioning if they wanted a new game, or if they simply yearned for the old relationship they once shared with the builders of Azeroth. Driven by a desire to reclaim the slow progression and tight-knit server communities of the past, players built their own unauthorized versions of the game. These private servers operated outside Blizzard's control, offering the original, unpatched virtual world. By 1916, a fan-run server called Nostalrius had attracted hundreds of thousands of active users seeking the friction and strong server identity that modern updates had stripped away. In April 1916, Blizzard issued a cease and desist letter that shut Nostalrius down, sparking an immediate backlash. Over 150,000 players signed a petition demanding legacy realms, transforming a legal dispute into a massive public campaign for game preservation. Recognizing this organized demand, Blizzard shifted its stance and assembled an official legacy server team. On August 26, 2019, the company launched World of Warcraft Classic. The release triggered a second server crisis, with millions of players waiting in hours-long queues to experience a world defined by deliberate limitations and slow, punishing progression. Classic proved that nostalgia was the demand for a different relationship with time. Where the modern game prioritized fast convenience, Classic offered consequence. This legacy ecosystem expanded into hardcore mode, where character death is permanent, and the Season of Discovery, which introduced experimental mechanics into the old world. Neither version claims the entire player base, but together they highlight a fundamental split. Some players want a smooth, efficient experience, while others crave a world where every step has weight, social accountability matters, and every death is final. On March 2nd, 2026, Blizzard released World of Warcraft, Midnight, returning players to the elven homeland of Quel'Thalas and the historic spires of Silvermoon. As the second act of the Worldsoul saga, this chapter pits forces against the Voidborn antagonist Xal'atath, who threatens the sacred Sunwell inside the high-stakes Voidstorm raid. The expansion delivers major structural updates: the hybrid, subterranean Harrenir allied race, the highly unpredictable prey difficulty system, and the official release of customizable player housing. These features prioritize broad participation and account connectivity, reflecting a design philosophy that meets modern players exactly where they are. Yet this seamless efficiency highlights the division at the heart of the modern game. By removing the daily hurdles that once forced cooperation, These systems test whether true community can exist when individual play is made completely frictionless, or if players are simply sharing a space in isolation. Beyond these battles, the path leads to the Last Titan in 2027, where developers promise to address the monumental mystery of the Sword of Sargeras in a redesigned Northrend. Through 20 years of server crises, legendary raids, intense corporate upheaval, and lifespans live together online, the world persists. It remains a vast, shared home for millions who still find magic in the quiet spaces of a virtual world. The story of Azeroth isn't over. Twisted Rewind. If Azeroth has ever felt like home, subscribe, leave a like, and tell us your story in the comments. For over 20 years, BlizzCon has functioned as more than a marketing venue. It is a shared ritual where players gather to witness the future of their virtual home. These historic spectacles shape collective anticipation, transforming developer announcements into a promise about what Blizzard believes players will value next. Yet, as players look toward the next major horizon, official event records revealed that a BlizzCon for 2026 is not officially scheduled, leaving its occurrence expected but unconfirmed. Without a confirmed convention, the future of the Worldsoul saga relies on digital roadmaps. While players trade rumors of Classic Plus or new character classes, these features remain unverified community expectations. The community is left waiting, wondering how the developers will sustain the immense pressure of their massive, multi-year roadmap without their historic physical stage. The 2023 announcement of The Last Titan established the official foundation for the finale of the Worldsoul saga. According to Blizzard's official disclosures, the story centers on the Titans returning to order the restoration of Azeroth's Worldsoul. Outside this central premise, a vast gulf separates verified facts from community speculation. While players expect a return to the frozen wastes of Northrend and the halls of Ulduar, these locations remain community expectations rather than confirmed release details. To understand the actual roadmap, one must separate official teasers from developer hints, data mine file names, and elaborate fan theories. Unsupported rumors of pirate themes or cosmic crossovers have no place in the verified record. This missing information functions as a deliberate promise, a book with pages intentionally left blank. The developers face the difficult challenge of building genuine anticipation for 2027, all while avoiding the historic cycle of overpromising and subsequent disappointment. The true weight of Azeroth exists outside of patch notes and subscriber metrics, written instead in the quiet, documented history of individual lives. For more than 2 decades, long-running guilds have functioned as genuine social institutions, complete with their own leadership, internal conflicts, personal memories, and generations of succession. The guild method, formed in 2005, maintained weekly runs of Molten Core for 15 years. On roleplay servers like Moonguard, active since 2006, players built a shared fictional society that existed alongside the main game, staging elaborate character-driven narratives and hosting in-game weddings. Between 2010 and 2020, Blizzard's marriage registry tracked approximately 12,000 player-initiated weddings between people who first met in the game. These social bonds formed across raid teams, player-versus-player rivalries, and Discord servers. While some players chase the highest level of competitive prestige, others find their rhythm in Mythic Plus, repeatable, timed dungeon content designed for smaller, recurring teams of 5. This virtual existence regularly spilled over into physical reality through costume crafting and massive attendance at physical conventions, where digital avatars became face-to-face friendships. An entire ecosystem of creators grew to interpret this world. Broadcasters like Asmongold, who began streaming in 2014 and gained over 2 million subscribers, shaped community reactions to game updates. Guides by creators like Preach helped spark interest in the high-stakes permanent death hardcore mode, while the hosts of the WoW Analysis podcast, Taliesin and Evitel, analyze mechanical changes weekly since 2018. Today, the player base is divided among competing priorities, ranging from highly competitive speedrunners to casual collectors, roleplayers, and historians. Yet at the smallest human scale, the game persists because it remains a space where people show up for each other. In a world of fleeting digital spaces, millions still log in not to play, but simply to return to a place where someone is waiting. The boundary between genuine history and internet folklore remains highly contested. In the dark underbelly of Deadwind Pass, the legendary Karajan crypts stand as a confirmed developer secret, a haunting zone left unfinished but officially acknowledged. In Tirisfal Glades, a hidden bathroom Easter egg is likewise confirmed as developer humor. These contrasts reveal how players became digital archaeologists. While early design documents prove that the cancelled Shatrath City raid of Draenor is a fact, the legendary Mount Hyjal cut content claim is now officially debunked by developers who confirmed the zone was always built as intended. Meanwhile, the rumored Shadowlands Void Portal remains an unverified rumor, and data mining itself is a fact of leftover client assets, rather than a guaranteed roadmap of future development plans. Finally, the idea that the Ahn'Qiraj war effort was designed to require every single individual player is a popular community theory. Azeroth's gaps in history continue to turn active players into dedicated archivists and passionate mythmakers. World of Warcraft transformed how the entire entertainment industry conceptualizes online worlds. Its structural choices, from streamlined questing and automated matchmaking to structured raid tiers, became the standard architecture of the live service era. Other virtual spaces adapted to its approachable design, while Battle.net established the blueprint for unified gaming networks. Players customized their experience using Lua scripting for add-ons, a practice that permanently altered user interface expectations across the medium. The introduction of the WoW token and microtransactions pioneered new virtual economies, merging digital labor with real-world finance. As early forum communities evolved into massive live streaming networks, Azeroth's aesthetic, recognizable characters, and accessible storytelling redefined mainstream fantasy. Ultimately, this success changed Blizzard itself, turning a small development studio into a massive, heavily scrutinized corporate entity. Yet its greatest legacy is the normalized expectation that a digital product can become a genuine home. Ultimately, Azeroth's greatest triumph is not its commercial legacy, but the digital sanctuary millions built inside it. As the Worldsoul saga pushes toward its final acts, the true test is not whether developers can perfect modern mechanics, but whether a fragmented community can still find shared magic in a frictionless world. After 20 years, Azeroth is no longer just a game. It remains a living monument to the human connections we forged along the way.